the entrance door. And when you're, in order to make the meeting more productive, can you please all take a look at your cell phones, put them on silent or vibrate so they don't disturb. And we're really asking for people, no matter how passionate you are about something someone else says, whether you like it or don't, if you applaud or boo, that really tends to make the meeting less productive. So what we found is really great. People sometimes do jazz hands if they like something, and that gives us a sense of what you're doing without disrupting the meeting. We also ask that you don't stand in the aisles or the back of the rooms, because that would violate our safety and building codes. So I'm going to just do a couple of brief introductory remarks and then turn it over to the mayor as well. We're here tonight at South Coast AQMD really to bring together the key parties that can help answer some questions that we've heard from the community about the Torrance Air project, and also what South Coast Air Quality Management District has done and is continuing to do regarding some of the higher readings of benzene that were reported on the website. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the mayor first, and then I'll get into some additional background.
Thank you, Jill. On behalf of my colleagues, I wanted to thank the AQMD and their staff for coming here to our city to present this evening. But I'd be remiss if I didn't introduce my colleagues who are here in the audience. Jeff Rizzo, who's in the back, Councilmember George Chen, who's in the back, and Tim Goodrich. We also have a former council member and former assemblyman, George Nakano, who is here as well, longtime resident right over here in the center. And we're very pleased that this will give the community an opportunity to participate with the AQMD this evening. Torrance continues to, and I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules for being here this evening. I'm certain that everyone could find any number of other things they could do, but you chose to come here because of your concern about our city and the safety of everyone who lives here. And we, as a community and as your city leaders, I want to assure you that we work closely with all of our partners to keep the community safe and informed. We're happy to host the South Coast AQMD to give us all a better understanding of our air quality and their air quality management project, torranceair.org. Again, thank you to the South Coast Air Quality Management District for your partnership. I hope this evening can provide clarity into the benzene investigation, the health-based standards, enforcement, and means of evaluation for our communities. I look forward to hearing from the professionals as well as the professionals who are sitting in our audience as well. So I'm sure this will be a meaningful gathering. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you very much, Mayor, and we also really appreciate you providing the venue and hosting us here. It's a very good opportunity for us as well. So I want to just provide some brief background on two different projects. Many of you are aware that in June 2016, the South Coast Air Quality Management District Governing Board approved funds for a supplemental environmental project to be used in the Torrance community. And this was part of the settlement agreement that followed the 2015 ExxonMobil explosion. We had an extensive public process to solicit ideas. I think we were actually in the same room on what the best use of those funds would be. And based on the community feedback, two different projects were selected. The first was Sonoma Technology, or STI, and that's the project where they're established the community and fence line monitoring system, and that's what we're going to be talking about mostly tonight. And the second was for the city of Torrance to expand their community alert and siren notification system. So the first project, the community monitoring system, was really a community-led project. South Coast AQMD provided more than $2 million of funding from that settlement agreement, as well as technical input on the monitoring proposal, and the project itself is led by STI. STI established a Torrance Air Advisory Committee, I think some of you were on that process, to provide input on the design of that air website. And the committee included members of the community, city representatives, industry, and the consultant. The system was designed to provide near real-time and continuous data from monitors in the community, and then the information is provided on the website by STI. The second project, which is expanding the City of Torrance alert and siren notification system, will be developed, implemented, and operated by the City of Torrance, working closely with the Torrance Fire Department. So tonight, STI will talk about the higher levels of benzene that were reported on the Torrance Air website, talk about technical issues that have been identified with the monitors, and next steps. And South Coast AQMD staff will provide a brief presentation on what we did to investigate those higher readings and our technical evaluation of that air data system. The City of Torrance is here tonight to talk about the siren notification system. And we're going to, if you bear with us just for a few minutes, we'll do these presentations, and then the main purpose is to get the public comment. So if you are interested in a public comment, we've got some AQMD staff around the perimeter. Please fill out one of these blue speaker cards, and then when we get to that portion of the meeting, we'll be calling you up, and we're really looking forward to your comments and your questions. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Paul Roberts, who's the Chief Scientific Officer with STI.
Good evening. I'm talking to you tonight as part of a team at Sonoma Tech and at GNA. And I'd like to introduce the staff members that are here that have supported this project, plus there's lots more. Josette Marrero is the project manager. She's a PhD from UC Irvine and has done air quality studies around the U.S. and actually around the world. She's helped a lot on getting the field studies going here and things like that. Newly joined STI is Barbara Lee. Barbara is now the Director of Community Air Quality and Climate Programs at Sonoma Technology, and she previously worked in both state and local government on air quality and toxic issues as well. We also have a couple members from GNA here. Sarah, raise your hand higher, Sarah, and Celeste. They're part of our team in doing public outreach. They've helped run the advisory committee meetings and develop materials to help educate and involve the public in our program. So this is a quick summary of the overall project that we're involved in. And I'd like to use it a little bit to summarize and outline what I'll present today. But we had a community and stakeholder engagement part of the program, an air quality monitoring program, which we'll be spending time today talking, and a public website and notification system. And through all of that, there's public outreach and education both on the website and in other ways. Today we're going to summarize, I'll summarize a little bit about the project design process, what we've done, and the next steps, just as a quick summary, and then we'll go into detail. I'll first talk about the benzene investigation that Jill mentioned, including South Coast. Andrea will talk then in the middle of the talk about what the district has done, and then we'll talk about what our results are and what the next steps are in the investigation for benzene concentration. Near the end, I'll talk a little bit more about the status of the whole project, not just the community monitoring and benzene part, and what the next steps are for that. The advisory committee involves a large number of people from the community. We've had several meetings, and they participated in the design process. Members include homeowners association, City of Torrance, elected officials, the school district, the community organizers, the refinery, the fire department, the South Coast AQMD staff, and then our team, Sonoma Technology and GNA. In the network design process, we really work together to we presented a preliminary network design. We got feedback from the community and from the advisory committee. We revised that design and provided updates on that, and then that eventually got approved by the South Coast Air Quality Management District. Just in summary, where are we today? We have an approved network design. We have monitoring sites. We secured them, got power for those sites, prepared them, selected air quality instruments. We'll talk a little bit more about benzene in particular later. Tested those instruments, developed a data acquisition system. There's a lot involved in collecting data from monitoring sites and delivering it back to the website and the community within a 5 to 10 minute period right after the data is collected. So we have the website running. We got feedback on the initial design of that from the advisory committee, and that helped focus that. We've installed the equipment, we've deployed the website, and there's a mobile version of that that you can use on your phone. And we're now in the middle of operating and doing routine maintenance and trying to optimize that network. I guess one thing I just wanted to say here at the beginning is the measurements we're making are the ones that are most critical in the community from the refinery in this case. HF, hydrogen sulfide, benzene, toluene, orthoxylene, black carbon, that's a surrogate for diesel particulate matter, which contributes to community toxicity, and wind data so we can tell where the material might be coming from. So just in summary, where we're going, the project also involves 4 open paths on the north side of the refinery, and those are set up and operating. The data is internal right now. We're working out the final details with the refinery so that that data can be displayed on their website and the Torrance Air website at the same time. We feel we're close enough to that to say we're going to finish that in February this month. We're going to deploy purple air particulate sensors in March. These are sensors that we can have a lot more of. They're an inexpensive sensor, and the community can learn more about particulate matter in the community as part of the public education component of the project. We've been talking with the city and the fire department about confirming that they can receive our data, and that's available to them in the use of their new enhanced network for the emergency response system. And Alan will talk a little bit about what that network is later. And then we have a program called Kids Making Sense that we run in the schools, and we're going to be running that in the Torrance schools over the next 6 to 9 months. Here's just a pictorial, and this is in the handout. I'm not going to go over the full details because I've sort of mentioned them along the way, but this is a pictorial timeline of the various steps we've taken to implement the program, both the fence line and the community monitoring program, and involved the advisory committee and all of that. Now we'll switch to talking in a little more detail about the benzene concentrations that have been on the website. So just as a quick summary, we've had about 2,500 hours of data, and according to the results on the website, and we'll talk about that in a minute, all but 2 of those hours have had concentrations below the reference exposure level of 8 ppb. Those 2 hours, almost 1 hour at the North High School site and just over 1 hour at the West High School site, were short periods when the benzene was measured and reported above that short-term reference exposure level. However, during evaluation of that data, we've decided, and we'll talk about that in a minute, that data was measuring higher than appropriate. And so you can consider those then as upper limits, I guess, and we'll talk about that in a minute. I guess there was one other event that happened that we should mention on a couple Saturdays ago, February 8th. There was a short period of one of the monitors over the REL, and within a few minutes, well, a few tens of minutes, we decided that that was a false alarm, and we took that data down as invalid. It turned out we had installed an extra monitor that was uncalibrated, and accidentally that data went to the website, and it shouldn't have been. So there was some discussion about that and how we should communicate that kind of information in the future, and we will improve how we do that. Based on the data we've seen on the website, and especially those 2 or 3 incidents where the benzene concentrations were a little higher, the questions are obviously, is that data real? Are the measurements accurate? And both Sonoma Technology and the South Coast AQMD have done measurements. The AQMD investigated nearby sources to see if there was something nearby that was causing this. Performed some co-located measurements with multiple techniques, and that's still ongoing in general. The quick conclusions are that the measured benzene concentrations that have been on the website do vary with time, but the levels are not as high as we've shown on the website, and we're working on that, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So the actual benzene concentrations do not exceed the short-term REL. So we needed to do a more detailed investigation to understand this and understand why the instruments were reporting incorrectly high values. So the kinds of things that Sonoma Tech has done, we've obviously checked the instrument calibrations. We changed the instrument tubing once, and we changed it again. I'll talk about that in a minute. We've installed a 3rd generation rather than a 2nd generation instrument to compare with the existing instruments that has a little better temperature control. We also collected time and location match short-term samples that match the time when air data is injected into the instrument. And this is to try to evaluate what the results are at exactly that time when the instrument is collecting data. We've sent that data to an independent certified lab. The South Coast will talk about some of the same kinds of things they've done. We've worked with the instrument manufacturer. We've consulted with some other experts, such as those at EPA who have run a similar instrument. The instrument manufacturer has also supported us in this endeavor. They've reviewed our calibrations in the ambient data. They evaluated compounds that might be found in the air that could be interfering and measuring as benzene as an interfering compound. And just this week, they've sent engineering support to be on site with us to evaluate the instruments, and actually we're doing some changes, and they found some errors in the instrument. So if we want to summarize where we are right now, we've confirmed that the 3 sites are reporting benzene data that's higher than it should be. Okay, and we found just in the last day and confirmed that there was contaminated tubing within the instrument and in the calibration line and the sampling line. And we changed that tubing, and we're currently verifying results. And the corrections are in the direction we think they should be, and we're going to evaluate and verify that over the next few days. The South Coast AQMD did look at all the data in the past to evaluate whether any of that data exceeded the short-term REL of 8 ppb. And only those couple hours did, and they determined that in those periods the concentrations were actually lower, and therefore the concentrations did not pose an immediate threat to public health. So now we're going to break my talk, and Andrea is going to...
Good evening, everyone. So I will discuss some of the investigation activities that the South Coast AQMD conducted to verify the accuracy of the benzene measurements, taken, by STI at the three Torrance Air monitoring stations. So just as kind of to show you a visual of the location of the three air monitoring stations, I mean, essentially at this point there are three sites. One is north of the Torrance refinery, and we call it North High School Station, because of course it's in the property of North High School. And then to the west we have a West High Station, and then to the south we have another site that we have called Elm Avenue Station. And those are identified by the red dots in the map. So just also kind of to remind you of the series of events that led us here. Back in 2019, in October of 2019, STI started the measurements of benzene and other pollutants at the North High and Elm Avenue stations. Then in December 27th of 2019, they added the third station at West High. And on January 3rd, and then I'll kind of clarify why, that's when we started to really start developing concerns about the accuracy of the benzene measurements taken, especially at the West High stations. And for this reason, we work with STI to try to figure out the problem, but also we conducted independent enforcement action and measurements, and we also conducted inspection, but also we use different type of air monitoring technology to verify the accuracy of the STI measurements. And I'll describe all of this in a moment. So in terms of compliance investigations, back in January 3rd, there were a couple of things that happened. In the morning of January 3rd, the South Coast AQMD received several sulfur odor complaints northwest of the Torrance refinery. And so our compliance and enforcement group, went on site, investigated this situation, and worked with the Torrance refinery, and they were able to identify two storage tanks that you can see there, within that red circle, and the odor was traced back to one of the two tanks, inside of the facility. Our compliance team issued the notice of violation to the refinery. And the problem was basically resolved early in the afternoon of the same day. And one of the other things that happened during January 3rd is that later in the evening at about 8 p.m., one of the Torrance Air monitors, the one north of the refinery, recorded a benzene concentration of about 8.8 ppb, which is relatively high. It's higher than 1 hour relative exposure limit. However, just because these are two separate events, they occurred during different time of the day, it was concluded that the leak that happened in the morning had no impact on the Torrance Air benzene measurements. So also on January 8th, so kind of also to give you a better idea of what's going on at West High, the monitoring station at West High is located within the parking lot of the school and is identified on, by the red dot. The location of the station is identified by the red dot on the right side of the map. Within the same parking lot, it's very difficult to see if you go on site and you look around, but there are a couple of storage tanks that are operated by power run oil. And so our compliance team went on site, and they were able actually to, there was no major leak coming out of those two storage tanks, but they were able to identify a small leak coming out of a gauge hatch of one of the two storage tanks. So the compliance team worked with the operator of this facility. The problem was immediately resolved. And also in this case, just because of the very small magnitude of the leak, it was determined that this leak had no impact on the Torrance benzene measurements taken at that West High monitoring station. So in terms of what the South Coast AQMD Measurements Division did to verify the accuracy of the Torrance Air measurements, we used three different kind of technologies that are complementary to the one that is being used by STI. So the first type of technology is what is called, a canister samples. I mean, essentially you have this, metal container that is used to collect air samples on site. You can collect two different kinds of samples. One is what we call the grab sample, or instantaneous samples. So you go on site, you open the valve of that canister, and within 30 seconds you collect an air sample. Then you then return to the lab and you analyze for benzene to determine the concentration. But also what you can do with this type of methodology is you can collect time average samples, meaning that you can collect a sample over a longer period of time, and in our case we collected 6-hour samples. So, one other method that we used is what is called an automated gas chromatography system. This is similar to what STI is using, although we are very confident about the accuracy and sensitivity of the instrumentation, but at the minimum, it can only measure 1 hour average benzene concentration. So the difference is that STI is using an instrument that determines the benzene levels every 10 minutes. So, in this case, the time average is longer, but you gain a little better, you gain a little more in terms of sensitivity of the measurements. And last but not least, we also used our research van. This is a mobile van that is using research-grade instrumentation that we call optical remote sensing instruments that are able to determine benzene levels and also the ambient concentration of other air pollutants every few seconds. So we use all of this technology, and I'll show you what we found. So in blue, essentially, this is it's a summary of the results of our mobile measurements. So the scale there, a blue line or a blue dot represents a benzene concentration of 1 hour ppb or less. And then as you move up, light blue, green, yellow, and bright yellow, that all basically indicates higher and higher concentration of benzenes. But as you can tell, these measurements were conducted on January 14th. We started at 4 a.m. in the morning, and we ended at 11 a.m. in the morning. So the reason why we conducted these measurements so early is that, especially at the West High Station, the highest concentration of benzene were measured very early in the morning. So we wanted to conduct measurements during the most representative part of the day. But as you can tell, with very few exceptions, the concentration of benzene pretty much everywhere around the refinery and close to the Torrance Air monitoring stations and within the community, they were always, about 1 ppm, 1 ppb or less. There are a few exceptions, some of the dots are, light blue or they are like green, but that's to be expected just because, this mobile van, is basically, driving on the street and, every now and then at a traffic light, for example, you might be sitting right next to a car that is emitting benzene and therefore, the concentration of benzene goes up. But this is a very strong indication that around the monitoring station and in the surrounding community, the concentration of benzene during that day and during that time of the day was low. Also what we did, we collected these grab samples on the same day, early in the morning, and we compared the results to the concentration measured by the Torrance Air systems at the same time. So as you can tell, at the Elm Street station, the concentration of benzene through our canister samples was about half of what was measured at the same time by the STI system. We repeated the same type of measurements at the West High station on the same day, more or less at the same time at about 5:50 a.m. And in this case, you can tell that our measurements were about, more than 5 times. Our benzene measurements were more than 4 times lower than what was recorded at the same time by the STI instruments. Also, during different days, between January 16 and 18, we deployed 2 different auto-GC systems, both at the West High station, and we deployed another GC system at the Elm Street station, again to do co-location measurements to verify the accuracy of the STI instruments. And we also collected canister samples. Long story short, these are the results. So the green dots represent the measurements from the Torrance Air monitors at the West High stations. And as you can tell, Okay, so the full picture is that the green dots are measurements of benzene levels from the Torrance Air monitoring station at the West High. The orange dots and the blue dots are benzene measurements conducted through our GC system. So, as you can tell, pretty much when we started the collocated measurements, our benzene level were always substantially lower than the benzene levels measured by the STI system at the West High site. And this is another, summary slide indicating that, the measurements of benzene levels through the STI system were pretty much always consistently higher than the benzene level measured through our, monitors, whether it is the output GC or the canister sample results. So to summarize, the South Coast Air Quality Management District conducted compliance investigation to rule out the possibility of different sources of benzene near the Torrance Air stations, and used 3 different monitoring methods to verify that the benzene level measured at the Torrance Air stations were within the limit that we expect for ambient concentration. And what we found is that our measurements suggest that the benzene level from the Torrance Air West High station, but also from the other monitoring stations, were biased high. So it basically confirms what Paul discussed during his presentation. And at this point, I will pass the microphone back to Paul to discuss next step and to kind of lead us into what the STI is going to do next, within the Torrance Air project.
So before I go, excuse me. So before I go, I wanted to remind people what we have discovered in the last few days is that we had contaminated tubing in the instrument and in the calibration and the sampling lines. And this tubing caused significantly higher concentrations to be measured in the instrument, and we're now in the process of verifying that. So with that as the potential solution, potential problem that we've identified to fix, I wanted to talk a little bit more about what our next steps are. So we're going to continue to work with the manufacturer to work on these modifications and evaluate them. And we're completing that hopefully tomorrow. We're going to continue testing some other instruments. We have one other instrument operating at the site now, and comparing the performance of both our instruments and the ones from the South Coast AQMD. We need to verify what the ambient and calibration data are with this clean new tubing that we've installed. So we are planning to collect air samples like Andrea talked. These are grab samples. The 10-minute data, there's about a 45-second period at the beginning of that 10 minutes when the air sample is collected and then injected into the chromatograph. So we're collecting our grab samples exactly during that 45 seconds in order to best match the 2 measurement methods. So we're going to be doing some of that in the next day or 2, and we'll get data back from the lab, the first initial results early next week. And we're going to evaluate then what that independent measure is versus what the instrument's now reporting. We'll also have about a week of data from the South Coast AQMD monitors that are on the hour average that Andrea talked about to compare with this data as well. So that's the initial step in the verification of getting these instruments to report correct data, accurate data. And, if we can't get this to be fixed, we're going to have to replace these instruments with something else. So that's part of what our commitment is to fix that. As part of these steps, we're obviously be working with the South Coast AQMD staff and developing the conclusions of this part of the investigation. And we're going to be presenting that to the Torrance Air Advisory Committee. We're trying to determine a date and time the week of March 23rd. And we'll also then get feedback from them and go back with, the district, by the way, is on the advisory committee, so they're participating in the process. But then we'll present that information back to the district for evaluation and a final decision on these instruments, or do we have to replace them. And then we're going to put that summary report of this part of the investigation on the website for the public to see and get comments from. So what else is going on with the monitoring program? We are measuring HF, hydrogen sulfide, and black carbon besides the benzene and the toluene and the xylene that we've been talking about, and winds. We're in the process of doing routine maintenance and troubleshooting and calibrations on all that equipment. We're going to leave the benzene data up on the website at this point, okay, until we have a resolution on what is really going on, that it can still be used as a qualitative indicator of what the concentrations are. Other parts of the project I mentioned earlier in the summary that the fence line measurements on the north part of the refinery are part of Torrance Air, and we're going to have that data up on our website, the Torrance Air website, and on the refinery website simultaneously this month. We're going to deploy the purple air sensors. We're looking at using some of the city locations. We're talking with the fire department about that. We're making sure that the data we're generating is available to the city and the emergency response system that the city and the fire department run. And we're going to be having the Kids Making Sense program. This is a STEM matching education program for middle school and high school children in the schools, has lesson plans and things like that, and we're going to be running that in Torrance schools. So I guess in ending, I want to make sure that people understand Sonoma Tech's commitment to solving this benzene problem and getting accurate and valuable data on the website and providing the education that goes with that. So this is a list of those things that we're going to solve the benzene performance problem and communicate the results. We will work hard at making sure this data is high quality, verified in real time, and delivered to the community and the information that goes with that. And I think it's apparent we need to improve the way the communications work both on the website and with the community in general. And the notification process needs a little more communication with it. So we're going to work more on that, and I know the South Coast AQMD is working on how notifications will work for Rule 1180, the fence line component, and we're going to make sure those are coordinated. Thank you for your time.
Yes, I have a couple slides.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Go ahead.
Are my slides up? I have a few slides I want to cover, give you an update on the siren project that we're working on with the AQMD. There it is. So I'll be discussing the neighborhood outdoor warning sirens. Now sirens, this is the additional layer of communication that we've been building in conjunction with the AQMD as part of the SAP project. City Council approved the project in December of 2017, and this is funding developed from as Dr. Wynot mentioned, from the SAP program. About $350,000 was for the sirens, and then another almost $60,000 to the Everbridge, which is our existing Torrance Alerts community notification system, to create that integration so we can notify the public in case of an emergency. So the NOW system will include 8 sirens throughout the community. Currently, we've installed them at, and have a map that shows the coverage. At the fire station headquarters, station 3, 4, 5, and 6, and pending station 2 at the airport. We're hoping to finalize that installation by end of this month. We also have added a siren at the Southeast Library, and these were geographically placed to attain the most coverage as possible, given the 8 locations within our budget. And a siren is actually, a 50-foot antenna pole is scheduled to be installed tomorrow. The city has a right-of-way across from Torrance, Memorial, Lomita, and Madison to cover the southern portion of the city. As I mentioned, installation should be completed by end of this month. We do plan a public outreach. You can imagine adding additional 8 audible sirens in the community. Most of Torrance is not familiar with this sound as North Torrance around the vicinity of the existing sirens at the refinery. So we want to make sure when we sound the alarms, it doesn't come as a surprise. It will, but we will do everything within our available social media and public outreach avenues to educate the public, as well as right now we're hoping to target launch date of June. That includes some testing and acceptance from the AQMD, as well as I mentioned, the public outreach. Our goal is to have a system test twice a year. Again, being very sensitive and mindful that this is a new concept and it's going to require lots of notification and sharing the information to the community. One thing I want to mention, this is an independent system from the community monitoring. The sirens will be activated as a call to action from the Torrance Fire Department, meaning if there is a major incident, we don't anticipate having any minor or elevated levels of any of the substances that was mentioned for the sirens to go off. We realize the threshold for siren activation, certain things have to happen. Large, mass-scale incident that will require broad notification. And I'll explain a little bit about the Torrance alert system that we have. So I want to emphasize it will only be activated after major incident with impacts to public health and safety as the trigger. This is the map. The slides, I don't have copies available today, but they'll be posted on our city's website, torranceca.gov. Refinery, we have a dedicated site. So this material we presented. There's, I think it's cutting off. The sirens 9, 10, and 11 are existing sirens over at the vicinity of the refinery. Those of you who live within the area are familiar. Once a month on Wednesdays, those sirens are tested. The additional sirens include the fire stations. Sometimes you'll see the pie missing. That's because of buildings and topography limitations. And as you know, in the interest of transparency, as you will notice, not all of Torrance is covered. This is just another layer of protection. Our intent would be to expand the system, and we have the capacity to expand. That requires additional funding and programming, but we're hoping to work with the Air District and other, even the refinery, trying to find additional resources so we could build out the system to cover the entire city. This is a sample. We try to utilize existing infrastructure at the fire stations. So this is mounted to an existing tower over at Station 4, which is Calle Mayor. This is over at Station 6 at Delamo Circle. You can see just literally these are speakers mounted in 4-directional to penetrate as much area as possible. And then this is a sample from our existing Station 1 headquarters. For those of you who have signed up for Torrance Alerts, thank you. For those of you who haven't, please go ahead and sign up for Torrance Alerts. We have 24-hour staff at the city. They're called interactive communications officers. These are individuals who monitor all radio communications. They're available at the disposal of the Torrance Fire and Police Departments. Some of you may recall you're receiving police activity, avoid a certain area of town, or if there's any flaring activity, we've been notifying depending on the threshold. The way we envision Torrance Alerts being utilized in regards to the community sirens, if there's a elevated level of a reading, then depending on the nature, we may use Torrance Alerts. If it's a major incident, we will use Torrance Alerts. Again, this is elective option, text message, email, you can self-select. We also have the ability to send mass text messages through the iPod system. That's a federal system that the city has access to. Should we notify the regional outside of the boundaries of Torrance? Somebody driving to Torrance with a cell phone will get the message. You probably see it like similar to Amber Alert type of system. And then the last layer that we have are the sirens to notify the community. With that, here's my information. I know it's not an easy last name, but Adam Japarian. Feel free to give me a call. I have cards if you want to see me after the meeting. And again, all this information will be shared, part of our public outreach, because we don't want to surprise folks with these audible sirens. And they'll be loud because we want to reach as many people as possible. So this is your preview. Stay tuned, literally, and additional information will follow. So thank you for your interest.
Thank you all. Thank you all very much for those comments. And I want to thank you for your patience to sit through us as we went through this presentation. We thought it was important to just kind of show you the extensive work that STI has been doing to make sure that these instruments will get corrected, and the work that South Coast has done with STI to try and verify the measurements. And I hope it's good news that the measurements are lower than what was initially reported. I think we can all be a little bit happy about that. And it's also working as intended. When we saw the higher readings, our enforcement staff went out with the technology that they had, with the measuring. They inspected facilities. They found some leaks. They weren't related to the benzene, but it got us out there and it caught our attention. So what we want to do, I want to encourage anybody else that wants to fill out a speaker card to please go ahead and do so. We have about a dozen cards right now. So if we do 3 minutes each, that'll take us, maybe 40, 45 minutes. We have a hard stop tonight at 8:30. That's the last part of the room availability, but I think we have plenty of time for your comments. So happy to do that. So we're going to go ahead and just call you up. I think this is roughly the order that was received. There's a little timer over here that'll help you gauge your time. And our first speaker will be Jessica Lombardozzi. And after Jessica will be Dr. Eng. So if you want to come on up, I'm interested in hearing your comments. Thank you. Yes, please. I think they'll all work, whatever you're comfortable doing.
Okay, thank you. So I have a couple questions, and I'm already losing time. Okay. So according to this new assessment that the monitors were collecting lower than initially reported data, I do think it's important to consider why there was a public nuisance case filed back in 2017 where a hydrolysis professor from Cal State Fullerton claimed that there was 2,000 times the state's maximum contamination level of benzene in the groundwater. I also think it's important to mention why neighboring city Lomita has had benzene contamination in their $13 million reservoir. So I don't know if anyone can offer any information on that. Okay, then I guess I'll just keep going? No?
No.
Okay.
Why don't you go ahead with your comments, and then afterwards we'll answer what we can.
Okay, great.
That'd be great. Thank you.
That's my first question. Secondly, I wanted to ask, based on the evidence, again, that was initially reported, has there been any epidemiologist specialist contacted, considering that chronically over long time exposure, there were initially, obviously, we've seen that there's difference, but has an epidemiologist specialist been reached out to, considering that the monitors were past the 1 part per billion, which is safe for long-term chronic exposure? That's my question.
Your comments? Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you. And we'll do the best we can to answer your questions. I'm not aware of the Lomita benzene contamination. I don't think so I'm sorry we don't have any information for you about that, or
Okay.
we weren't aware of that. And in terms of contacting an epidemiologist, this is a new system. STI is a very good company, but it takes a little bit of time sometimes with a new system to kind of shake out any of these little issues that are coming up. And so we don't have enough data right now to say that there is or isn't a long-term issue.
Okay.
We've had a couple of peaks. So no, we haven't contacted an epidemiologist, but we're all going to keep a really close eye on this data. Right now, it looks very similar to other areas of the whole region. It doesn't look like it would warrant anything like that, but we're definitely going to keep an eye on that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Since I have, I guess, a minute, I'll ask some more.
Sure.
So I'm curious, I'm not trying to be rude, just asking a question, why the accuracy of this technology was not tested before implementing not only 1 but 3 monitors in Torrance, and also posting results online for community members to see.
Well, before we purchased these instruments, we did receive data from the manufacturer demonstrating the capabilities and the accuracy of the instrument. In hindsight, it turns out we got instruments with contaminated lines that didn't meet the same criteria. Okay, and we're working on that and trying to figure that out. So yeah, it's in perfect hindsight, we could have done more, but we're doing it now. So, and we discovered what apparently is the problem. So,
Okay.
and the sample lines in the earlier instruments that they sent us data presumably were not contaminated with oil like these were.
Interesting. So only the ones that were posted, put up.
Well, this is all before I'm saying the data we looked at before we purchased the instruments didn't seem to have this contamination in the lines.
Okay.
I just wanted to add the community project was to post the data as quickly as possible. So it's almost real time.
Right.
And with that, there's a balance that it's not scrutinized by all the scientists and made sure that it's perfect before it goes up. So you get the information right away rather than waiting days, weeks, or sometimes months, which is a benefit. But there's always going to have to be a caveat that we've got to go back and sometimes make adjustments to it.
Right. And the benefit, I guess, obviously we're all here because we were worried that they went so high, so maybe might not have been that much of a benefit. Just food for thought. I have 34 seconds, so one last thing. I also think that it's important to mention, I think we focus a lot on the air aspect of benzene, but benzene is a VOC, a volatile organic compound. So if it's in the soil or the groundwater, it can permeate through that and get into buildings where it actually is more contaminating in the buildings because there's no wind or anything to push it out. So I do think that that's important to keep in mind too, that Torrance was built on hundreds of oil tanks for everyone to think about.
Thank you. So our next speaker will be Dr. Ng, and after Dr. Ng, Stephen Porvat.
Yeah. First of all, if you're off by a factor of 4 or whatever, the charts that you show with the peaks does not say that the peaks did not occur. So I'm still very concerned that there is a problem with benzene. For months, we cook once a week and jar up our food for instant TV dinners. And there have been many weeks in the past several months that my wife said, "Smell this, what is this?" And I sniffed it. I said, "It's not the refinery." And I thought about the chemicals. I didn't recognize it. It's highly likely that it was benzene. It has the right odor, sweet, blah, 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 blah. So this has been going on Sunday nights for a while. Your readings are not incorrect. There is a benzene problem. And so I'm really worried that you're going to calibrate this out of there. And if there's one chance in a few chances in 100 that you have a high benzene reading, and there's a few chances in 100 that someday somebody steals the cable, what is the chances that those are independent events? Is 1 in 10,000 almost. They are likely correlated events, in which case if the guy knew that there was high benzene and he wanted to hide it, he'd get some thief to steal the cable. So I started looking. I said, that sounds like illegal activity to me. So I went out on the web, and I have some printouts here I'm going to give to the chief there. on what you do in terms of cleaning up methamphetamine laboratories, because they use, when they produce illegal methamphetamine, they often will use benzene as a carrier to take it out of the solution and then take the methamphetamine benzene, vaporize the benzene, and take the crystal meth. So I think there's a crystal meth problem. I noticed in the last couple of weeks we have not smelled the air, that thing in the air. So I think the laboratory has moved. So I behoove the AQMD, since it is an air problem, a fire problem, because it's a fire hazard, it's a police problem. They should work with the school districts to see if they have an anonymous reporting if the price of methamphetamines has gone up since this benzene problem has been reported. It's a way you can coordinate with the school system all around the South Bay, not just the West Torrance, the police departments, the fire departments, the AQMD, and use basically this as a way of detecting methamphetamine illegal laboratories. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Eng. So if Stephen Horvath would like to come to the microphone, and definitely will. Thank you so much. And then the next one is, I'm having a hard time reading the writing, P-O, either D or O-J-A. I feel like it's an I test, initial D. So Proja or Puja D. So Mr. Horvath? We can hear you. Thank you.
Go their own way. That said, there was some information shared here about sensors being compared to mobile units and things like that, and the mobile units and the tests that you guys took at the same time, roughly, that the sensors were reporting the numbers, indicated that the secondary tests that you were doing next to those permanent stations were lower. But we didn't really hear much about how do you decide which one's the gold standard or which one is the one that you really determine would be most accurate. I mean, personally, just like from an outsider's perspective that knows nothing about this technology, a mobile unit to me would seem to have less capability than something that's permanently stationed there. So my gut tells me that the permanent stations were probably more accurate and more sensitive and more capable. So I'd like to hear a little bit about how you guys determined maybe that the errors were, aside from the, and I want to acknowledge the problems with the tubes and things like that, but how you guys would determine which one you'd prefer. And then as a resident here in Torrance, off of Torrance Boulevard at Anza, I'm just always concerned about my family, right? And I think a lot of people here are. And I think one thing I'd like to know is there something that we can do where we can keep an eye on this stuff inside our homes? I know one of the early speakers had mentioned, you know, that maybe in a closed apartment or a closed home, this stuff doesn't come and go as quickly as it would if we were somewhere else with a bunch of open doors and windows. So is there something we can do in our homes to keep an eye on this and or to help purify or filter it out if that technology exists? Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your questions, and very good questions, by the way. So when it comes to monitoring technologies, you know, there's really no perfect technology, right? So some technology is stronger in one department, weaker in another, and that's one of the reasons why, in order to verify these measurements, we used, you know, pretty much all that we have, right? So when it comes to the mobile van, so you know, the strength is that you can measure, in this case, benzene over a wide area, so you can check the concentration of benzene not just at one particular point in time. but you can basically have a wide area instantaneous snapshot of what's going on, right? And in terms of accuracy, the instruments in the mobile van are fairly accurate, but you're right in saying that the sensitivity of the fixed instrument that we co-located at the site is actually higher. So I would say that the comparison between the GC system that STI is operating and our auto GC system is a very good, solid, strong comparison that gave us confidence in saying that basically the STI measurements most likely were biased high. And just like you can imagine, we conducted tests on our auto GC system over fairly long period of time to confirm that they are sensitive enough, that they are accurate enough, and we have information to confirm that. When it comes to the canister samples and the results from those canister, both the grab and the time integrated samples, one of the but also those they are analyzed using EPA approved methods, so we have also confidence that the canister results are very accurate and precise. So, but all together combined, I think we have a very strong indication that the results are correct.
Andrea, do you want to address the second question briefly about what the equipment you to measure and then to possibly filter or purify in homes?
Sure. In terms of like measuring, benzene, like Paul mentioned some of the sensors that will be used within the community to measure particulate matter. In the low-cost sensor world, there are decent choices for measuring particulate matter, decent choices for measuring ozone. But when it comes to air toxics and benzene and other air toxics, there's really nothing that would allow you to measure benzene indoor unless you are willing to spend a significant amount of money. In terms of air filtration, the situation is very similar. There are air filtration devices that they are graded with the MERV system. So if you use a MERV 16, you can remove more than 90% of the particulate matter, more than 90% of the ultrafine particle, diesel, particulate matter. And but when it comes to gases, and especially benzene, there's really nothing out there that has been demonstrated clearly to be effective. Absolutely. Sure.
Thank you.
So when it comes to air filtration, most of the filters that you find in commercial buildings and even in residential homes, they're MERV 7 or MERV 6 or 7 or 8. And those are the filters that you can find at Home Depot or at Lowe's. They cost anywhere between like $20 and $50. When it comes to if you want something that is more effective, you should buy something that is rated higher. The highest rating, like in the air filtration world, is MERV 16. You can buy HEPA filter. This is a different discussion. But those filters are usually more expensive, although they do a better job at filtering particulate matter and particle and other pollutants. Sure.
Thank you. So the next speaker is Pooja, if I'm not butchering that name, and then Hanit Haj.
Hello. So my question is again related to the chronic exposure levels. I saw your PowerPoint addressed 2 hours out of the total 5,000 odd hours being higher than the peak exposure level. But we did not see any data on the chronic exposure level. And even if the readings were about half or 1/4 less than, your mobile readings were about half or 1/4 less than that, we see the three lines go up every day after 12 o'clock and then go down around 12 p.m. So there's a pretty long duration when we are being exposed to benzene above 1 parts per billion. So is there data available for that? Will we get that data at some point? Will that data be available to us? And what are the impacts? What do you consider a chronic exposure level essentially? And are we being exposed to that?
Sure. I can try to address the. The instrumentation, as was commented on before, we don't know yet, the most accurate concentration of benzene in the community, just because there are issues with the instrument that needs to be resolved. But also, I would like also to point out that the main objective of using this type of instruments that, they are near real time, they measure 5 minutes concentration of benzene, is to identify those periods of time when you have peaks, right? When the main information I would say that, the project, the Torrance Air project is interested in, is to identify when the concentration of benzene is elevated, is very high, when you have those spikes.
Okay.
Because that, essentially is an indication that there might be a leak or there might be something going on that we didn't know before and now we know, and you want to know it right away. So that's one of the primary objectives. When it comes to, the measurements of, low concentration for health assessment of chronic exposure, I don't believe that, those instruments are made to basically answer those type of questions.
So I'm going to jump in because I think your question was, what is the chronic exposure level that it should be below, and should you be concerned? So the chronic exposure level is 1 part per billion. Unfortunately, it's not unusual throughout our entire 4-county region to see that a few hours here and there over the 1 part per billion, or even an average over that. So that's something that's a regional issue. And it also, it's a long-term exposure. So I wouldn't be too concerned about a few hours here and there.
But it's a
really
few
is
hours
years.
every day,
Right.
right? It's
And
about
that
8 to
maybe-
10 hours every day, and
It may be
especially in the
traffic
mornings.
patterns.
But it
maybe
starts
other
at around
sources.
3 a.m. It couldn't be traffic at 3 a.m. and it's all
Oh,
the 3
3 a.m.
lines,
Okay.
all 3 monitors. Around 3 a.m. they go. So if it's all the 3 monitors, it cannot be concentrated traffic, school pickup time. So I'm assuming it's something else. Do we know the source of why it increases around 3 a.m. every day, 6 days a week?
I think it's something that we'll have to really look into to see what's going on, but we need a little bit more time with more data
Okay.
on that.
And my second question is, I know there's something happening regarding you're trying to validate this data. Is there another independent source that will again revalidate these monitors and this data and so on as well? Or will it just be SDI itself doing the validations? Will there be an independent party that validates these monitors and readings?
So, why don't we go in sequence?
Okay, there's 2 parts. The atmosphere acts differently at night and daytime, okay? And so you can have the same emission sources, benzenes from motor vehicles, fuel, the refinery, various sources. If those emissions are put in the air at night when there's an inversion, which means the volume of air that the pollutants are mixed into is much smaller at night, and the winds are low, the wind speeds are low, then the concentrations can be higher, even though the emissions are the same as during the daytime. When the atmosphere, the land is warm and the mixing goes quite up to 2,000 feet or 3,000 feet. So the diurnal pattern that you see is due to the way the atmosphere is treating those emissions, not necessarily that they're higher emissions at night when you're seeing those peaks. So that's part of the atmospheric process that occurs during the wintertime. During the summertime, the winds are stronger both onshore and offshore at night, and those stronger winds mix the pollutants up much more and produce lower concentrations. So this is part of how the atmosphere works. That's part of that, okay? Now there could be emissions at night too, more than the daytime, but in general, less traffic would produce lower concentrations, but because of this atmospheric process, it produces higher concentrations.
I would still, it'll be great if there is actually an investigation as to why after 12 a.m. and until 11 a.m. in the morning, we see these 3 monitors rise. And it is, I would consider it chronic exposure because it is a significant amount of hours that we are about that. And about the second independent validation or verification of your...
Sure. We can certainly, do spot checks and, verify the performance of their instruments on a periodic basis. And I think that we have demonstrated that the type of technology that we have confidence in, and we can possibly repeat this type of measurements to give the community confidence that the instruments are working correctly.
Okay. Thank you very much. So will Hanit please come to the microphone, and then Jesse Marquez will be the next speaker. And just to let you know, we now have a total of about 18 cards.
Good evening.
Good evening.
First of all, thank you for coming out here and trying to clarify this issue. I'm a 40-year resident of the immediate West High area, and where this monitoring station sits is about 250 feet away from my backyard. So if I sound frustrated, concerned, and angry, I hope you understand why, okay? First of all, I'm glad we're collecting data. Number two, I would like to address what power and oil issue was. I can tell you with a lot of confidence that Power and Oil has never run that facility the way they should have without the, without the residents in the immediate area being like fleas on them. And so, there could be an issue with Power and Oil because what they do is there used to be 4 wells in that area. There are 2 in the alley, which is west of Enza and east of Donora. And there was one on White Court, which is just on the other side of West High School by Victor. And they pipe all the oil from those 3 wells, plus the one that's in the parking lot, into those tanks. The one in the West High School parking lot does not run at night, or is not supposed to run at night. I should clarify that. But the one in the alleys can run 24 hours a day. So they pump the oil in there. So, is there a leakage in their system that's creating the benzene? I don't know. Because besides oil, they claim that they get gas out of it as well. What gas they get out of it, I'm not sure. So that's one. Second, really is a question I'm going to direct to Paul. And, like somebody said earlier, I'm not trying to be rude, but I'm just concerned and frustrated. And the question is, has Sonoma Technologies used this technology before using it in Torrance? Is it a tested process? Is it tested technology, or are we in Torrance guinea pigs for this? And I'll sit down and take your answer, Paul.
Well, this is not brand new technology. It's been used for a while, and the fundamental components, chromatography, have been used for 40 years, 30, I don't know, for air pollution at least 25 years or 30 years, the general technology. This instrument has been tested by the manufacturer and by other clients that have used it. We tested in the lab before we brought them in. We had not used this equipment before this project, so that's part of it. But the data they provided us for calibrations and ambient concentrations and comparisons met our standards, and we thought the equipment would meet that, and we still think it may meet that, but because of the apparent contamination in the sampling lines, it didn't during this first period. So I apologize for that, but we're working hard to fix that.
That is, if the contamination read benzene wrong, okay, why did it not read the other pollutants have different readings, or higher readings, if it was a contamination issue?
I'm sorry, I don't
Okay,
quite understand the question.
Okay. Let me rephrase the question differently. What I'm hearing, and maybe I'm hearing it wrong, is that the reason we see certain high levels of benzene readings is because of the contamination in the tubing. Now, my presumption is it's the same tubing that's collecting the air samples for other pollutants. Why are those not reading higher as well?
Okay, good question. I now understand better. So there's 2 parts to the answer. Number 1, this instrument measures benzene, toluene, and orthoxylene. All 3 compounds we think are wrong. Okay. Number 2, the contaminated oil that's in these tubing that is when the tubing's made, that was accidentally left in, inappropriately left in, affects the way the calibration happens and removes some of those compounds from the calibration gas. That means you turn up the gain on the instrument because you think it should be feeding 10 ppb, and you didn't know it wasn't. So you turned up the gain, and that then results in higher ambient concentrations than they should have. So, you know, this tubing is typically delivered as chromographic grade tubing that's cleaned, and the vendor that delivered it didn't do the cleaning properly. So.
Thank you. Jesse Marquez, and after Jesse, Catherine Lays. And so thank you for coming up closer, so you're right up there ready to go. Appreciate that.
Thank you. I'm also the founder and executive director of the Coalition for a Safe Environment. We are now a 19-year-old environmental justice organization headquartered in Wilmington, and for 19 years we have tracked, followed, and monitored every petroleum industry rule, regulation, procedure by all regulatory agencies. And so personally, I come from a background as a test technician, manufacturing engineer, quality engineer, quality project engineer, and test lab manager. So don't assume us people sitting in the residents in the public here do not understand what you're talking about. Do not assume that we're not capable of understanding data. Many of us will not, but then we'll ask the right questions to get to the real details of things. And if someone asked me, why did this happen here? And I told them, it is the South Coast AQMD fault. They are responsible for this happening. And the reason being is because the South Coast AQMD had public meetings and hearings last year about the implementation of AB 1647, as well as the new federal EPA regulation that all refineries in the United States, which is 192, all would have to have air quality monitoring there at their facility. During that time, our organization always submit public comments. And I commented in all 6 refineries here in the South Bay area. And one of those questions we asked, what procedure was AQMD going to have to monitor the maintenance, calibration, and validation of these air quality monitors? And once again, they ignored a public request and public comment. That's why this happened. Another thing, we also asked in our questions and the public comments, we wanted to know the manufacturer and the model number of all instrumentation. And again, AQMD ignored us and did not respond to it. So that's that little portion of it. Now, in terms of the manufacturer, AQMD should be filing charges against the manufacturer. This is not a cheap instrument. This falls in the category of very expensive instruments. And every expensive instrument manufacturer, and about 90% of the low-cost instrument manufacturers, calibrate the equipment at their manufacturing complex. And almost 90% of all expensive ones provide a certificate of calibration. And if there was something wrong with their calibration procedures, then that is one more thing. They should be prosecuted.
So thank you very much, Jesse, for your comments. And in case others are less familiar with Rule 1180, which South Coast AQMD has on the books, it requires fence line monitoring and community monitoring around all of the refineries, and that's starting very soon. So these were comments that he made during that process. And you said, you know, this is South Coast's fault. South Coast worked with the community on the type of project. We evaluated this. We chose STI, and they are a good firm. And you're right, we're responsible for looking at this data. We did the best we could when these readings started coming out, that they were high, and we were getting calls, and we were also looking at it, and we tried to jump on it right away. And you see we did some, yes. I've run air monitoring systems myself for many years, and you calibrate daily. So yes, I hear your points, and thank you for those comments. So Catherine, could you please come up to the microphone, and then Mike Jackson, if you're ready to come to the other microphone after that. Hi, nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Yeah, and I understand we've acknowledged kind of what went wrong, but I do appreciate the AQMD's responsiveness on this and the efforts to be, really transparent in what's going on. So I do really appreciate that. I had a few questions. Some of this is kind of going to sound repetitive, but I think a lot of everyone that's here is really concerned about the chronic threshold of 0.9 parts per billion being exceeded, or I'm sorry, 0.1. So I know that things are still kind of getting calibrated and figured out, but my question is there going to be kind of reports that show the levels for Torrance? Because the most recent MATES data shows, 0.4 parts per billion is the average benzene concentration within the LA basin. And as it's been said, it's showing much, much higher than that. So I'm wondering if through this community monitoring project, there will be an average of benzene concentration kind of reported at the end of the year, or whenever there's a cycle, quarterly cycle.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Okay, can you pause the call?
Or why don't you go ahead with your comments?
Okay, so that's
we'll
one question.
in.
I was just wondering
Okay.
if there's going to be some sort of report so we can just kind of see the trends around here. And then I just wanted to know, has the well that's on the West High campus or directly adjacent to it, has it been ruled out as a contributor to at least the chronic levels? I know there was a leak that was patched, but is that a contributor? Is that being investigated? And then my last comment is just, I know that a lot of these sites are chosen kind of based off of, research from Diamond Bar and, Google Maps and things like that. And I just want to comment that Del Amo at that area by West High is really not that busy a road. It really is. There's certain times of day that, yes, it gets traffic, but it's not that busy a road. And when we see high levels, even if, especially at off hours, it's really unusual. And I think that's why the residents here are so concerned, because it's just not that busy a road, even during peak hours. So those are my questions.
Well, Catherine, in terms of, thanks for your questions. I think in terms of long-term data, we will have annual average data from this experience, and the only long-term data that currently exists is the MATES program that the South Coast AQMD runs, and the MATES 5 report is due out soon. So those sites are slightly differently selected than these sites. Those sites are intended to be as far away from major sources, freeways, and refineries as possible. So you might expect data in the El Segundo, Wilmington, Torrance, Carson areas to be a little higher. But I don't know that that's the case yet. We don't know, And like Andrea said, we need to use long-term measurement techniques too. So this will be using short-term measurement techniques to calculate a long-term average. That's one way, but we need to verify that with other kinds of measurements that AQMD will do. And MATES 5 report will be out soon that has some of that data too.
I guess I'm just wondering if this, that what we see through this program, if it will kind of be a supplement or supplement to the MATES data. I know that it's not normally where MATES sensors would be placed because we have so much industry here, but I'm just wondering if that data will be available to the public.
I'm sorry, which
like
data?
long-term benzene averages in the
Yes.
Torrance area. So that will be.
Right, we will be calculating those.
And it'll be shared.
Yes.
Okay.
And then your other questions too about have we ruled out the wells in the West High campus and that it's not a high traffic area. I don't think we've ruled anything in or out yet. We did find a problem there that was not really related to the benzene. But what tends to happen at AQMD is if we find a facility where there's a problem, we go back to check that it got fixed. And then the more problems they had, the more frequent they see our inspectors. So it's definitely on our radar and something that we'll be taking a look at.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so Mike Jackson, please. And then after Mike Jackson would be Stuart Yenna?
Hi, I just have a couple questions that should be pretty quick, and the answers I'm guessing will be quick too. A couple of things that came up in my mind during the presentation. One regarding the expansion of the siren program, and you mentioned that the purpose for those sirens was to alert emergency response. But my question is, as a Torrance resident, is there any information available of what residents should do when these sirens sound? Second question is, I noticed on the map that for the monitoring stations, there's one to the north, west, and south of the refinery. I'm wondering what the logic behind not having a monitor on the east, which is also the predominantly downwind side of the refinery. Why is there not a monitor east of the refinery? Thank you.
In regards to the sirens, the shelter in place or evacuation will be the two major components of notification. And part of our outreach will be explaining what it all means as far as the chimes. That's how the current refinery sirens are utilized. They'll be publicly available. That's part of our goal. Otherwise, people are going to wonder, what does this mean? And then we'll have to explain this is a test. We have this audible, and then we also have the capacity to send out messages. But we have to be careful how we roll that out.
Thanks for your question. The question about the east side of the refinery is a good one. The Special Environmental Program funding from the fines are intended to serve the residents of Torrance only. And the east side of the refinery, the residents on the east side are not in Torrance. So we did evaluate this. We did talk about it at the advisory committee meeting, et cetera. But that was the conclusion. So
I want to jump in. The good news is, though, that that's not the only program. We have Rule 1180, and so Andrea is telling me there will be a monitor on that east side very soon. So this was a program that was supposed to bridge until we got to 1180. Of course it does, yes. So there will be a monitor on the east side, and then there's also the fence line perimeter. Okay, so Stuart Yenna, please, to this microphone, and then after him would be Walter Beckman.
Hi. My question more had to do with timing, and I'm a little concerned about the incompetence, or is STI really qualified to continue moving on? I can only assume that there's a budget that eventually is going to run out. Early on you said that this was based on the settlement on the explosion from a couple of years ago. So the stations went up. Seems to us that STI's had more than enough time to figure this out. So how long are we going to give them to figure this out? And there has to be some accountability. We just can't continue to wait and wait. So while they figure it out and learn how to calibrate and learn how to do what they were contracted to do to begin with, how is SQMD going to give us data? You said early on, let's continue to monitor Torrance Air. Well, what good is it if the information is unreliable? You guys did your own test. I said, well, okay, your stuff is reliable. Are you guys going to come, not randomly, systematically give us that information? Right now, we're at the mercy of STI that he used the word guinea pig, but I'm thinking, well, okay, I mean, I'm not anywhere in an important industry like this, but I would never roll out something that I don't know how to work. I would first test it and then move on. The community is at the mercy of this information that is totally unreliable. This is incompetence. And I'm assuming STI got contracted for some reason or another, but it seemed like the research wasn't there. How are you guys going to be accountable for this huge misstep? I mean, this is not little. This is a lot. What are you guys doing about that? How much time and how long are these stations going to be monitored? A year, 2, 3 years, months? How long is this budget estimated to take before it's all done?
Okay. Thank you for your good questions. Basically, they had a problem. They're doing everything that they can. We're working with them to get it fixed. It's, I think, pretty much resolved. I think the first thing was to find out what's causing these readings, and that's been done. And now they're working on it. So they'll have this corrected very soon. The contract was for 2 years of monitoring data, so they'll do 2 years of monitoring data when this starts. And then we will also have the fence line monitoring data that will be from the AQMD's monitoring and that the refineries are paying for. And so that, under that rule, will add to that equipment, to that. So we're definitely going to make sure that they're doing what they can to get that data correct.
What soon? A date has to be given. I wish I could tell my boss, I'm going to turn it over soon. No, that doesn't work. I mean, we're talking lives, kids, my children. Soon, STI needs to be held accountable. By this date, you need to have this figured out, learn how to calibrate. Have you guys given that ultimatum to them? If not, we're spinning our wheels here.
Okay, well, the problem occurred in January. We're in February, so that's,
People
it
can die
sounds like a
month.
long time. I know,
Kobe flew in the
in a
middle.
second. So we'll sit down with them and we'll talk about this and we'll figure out what we're going to do. And I can't tell you today that it's going to be a day, a week,
No,
but it's
have
not
you-
going to be a real long time.
No, yeah, but have you guys had your